We are recording. I am going to admit our participants. Here we go.
Is this going to be live on Facebook as well?
No, we are not streaming live.
Okay.
And our participation is light. Hopefully people will join before 6:30, but they may come in late. And I figured with the nice weather, we might have people who registered who may not join.
I'm glad you suggested starting early. It took me about 5 minutes to get this open.
Yes, thanks. Hi, Lenore. How are you?
I'm eager. I'm okay. Had a very full day.
Yep. Same here.
Why isn't my picture showing?
You have to do something with your video at the bottom.
Start video.
Yep. There you go.
Not yet. Oh yeah.
It's coming.
It is?
Yep, I think so. There you are. There you are.
There I am.
Beautiful. All right, we've got some people coming in. So I've got someone on the phone and Terry Parks is joining us. So let me admit them.
Hello, everybody who's here.
You may as well keep chatting because I will give it another couple minutes for people to join. So maybe another minute of chit chat and then we'll get into the program. Terry Parks. Terry Parks is the president of the League of Women Voters Buffalo Niagara chapter. Welcome, Terry.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello, Terry.
Now we do have someone on the phone. The person on the phone, can you just say who you are? Hi, Marlene. Okay, the person on the phone looks like they're muted. They muted themselves, so okay. Alrighty, well, I am a person who likes to get started. Hello? Janet, is that you?
I'm here, yeah.
Okay, just checking. All right. I am going to, so we are going to get started. I am going to ask our audience, please mute themselves so we don't get any of that background noise. We are recording the session tonight, so it will be available for viewing later. I am admitting more people in as we are talking. So my name is Susan Cerny. I am the chair of the Education Committee for the League of Women Voters Buffalo Niagara chapter. I've been a member just under a year. I am very pleased to welcome everyone here today. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our moderator, Marlene Deutschman, who will lead us through the discussion tonight. Take it away, Marion. Marion, sorry.
You can tell Susan's a new member. I'm Marion Deutschman. I'm a board member on the board of the League of Women Voters of Buffalo Niagara, and I'm a retired professor in the communication department at SUNY Buffalo State. Well, we're here tonight to learn more about the impact of the pandemic on schools. In the initial chaos of the pandemic, everyone had to adjust quickly to new ways of interacting, especially with technology. And the pandemic affected every area of our life, from work, leisure, community involvement, to parenting and schools. The learning curve seemed to be very steep at times, but I think we expect that it will have a lasting impact on how technology integrates into our daily lives. COVID-19 has also revealed vulnerabilities. It has also surfaced what we might call extraordinary human resourcefulness and potential. Some people are beginning to start thinking and considering post-pandemic implications for education and how our approaches to education and technology might change. Well, tonight we have a panel of experts who lived through it. We have Mark Mecca, who is a board member at the Williamsville School District, and he's also a school counselor for Buffalo Public Schools. We have William Breen, who is bilingual school counselor at the Herman Badillo Bilingual Academy, which is School 76. And he is also at School 48. Sharon Whitfield, who is business manager for a local company and a single mother of 2 students at the Grand Island High School. I don't think Ashley, yes, Ashley is here. Ashley, I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name, Ashley Skura Dreyer, who happened to be chosen as the New York State Teacher of the Year for 2014. And she works at the Lewiston Porter School. My grandchildren have been going to that school, and she teaches special ed. And we have Dr. Kevin Eberly, who is principal at Math Science Technology Preparatory High School at Seneca, and it's Seneca 197. I may be misleading people with that, but you could correct me on that. And Sam Radford III, who is program director at Community Action Organization at the Maston Resource Center. Well, as an audience, we need clarity. And I'm asking each of these expert panelists from their perspective, what is your assessment of the status of our children's education at this stage of the pandemic recovery? Where do we go from here? What did you learn in the process? Who would like to start? From your perspective, what is your assessment? Where do we go from here? And what did you learn in the process? Who would like to start? Please unmute yourself, Mark. Mark Mecca, we'll begin.
Hi. So I have gone through the pandemic in 3 different roles. One as a parent, one as an educator, and one as a board member. Probably the most memorable part of the pandemic for me is the time I spent with my daughter. I have a young 6-year-old who's in 1st grade. And it would be almost impossible, I would say, for someone that age to do remote learning on their own. So I was able to spend a lot of time with her, helping her with her academics, which is certainly a positive thing, but also the struggle of it gave me a real appreciation for how difficult this was for parents who are trying to do their work and educate their children at the same time.
Next, who'd like to go next? from your own perspective, what's the status? Where do we go from here and what did you learn?
So I could,
Okay. Dr.
it doesn't matter. Go ahead. No, Ashley, you can go ahead. Who was saying something? I
Okay,
can wait.
so I experienced this also in 3 roles as being part of a school board. So as a school board president, I had the experience of the pandemic. As a parent of a middle school student, I experienced the pandemic, and then also as a teacher in the classroom, and because I have a self-contained special education classroom, my students were 4 days a week with 1 day remote with me right from the beginning of this school year. So I had a class of about, it's a 12-1-1, there are about 10 students in class daily with me. And I think, I've also had a daughter that has graduated from high school and went on to college at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And one of the things that I knew before the pandemic is that if your child is leaving Western New York, if they're going on to higher education, and it's at a very competitive level. So my daughter attended an Ivy League institution. We are already behind the rest of the world. I don't know if parents quite realize that. I mean, they were very nervous about their children being behind when the pandemic started. A lot of parents came to meetings and expressed that, their children were falling behind academically. We were already behind before this started. My daughter was a top-notch student, obviously, to be admitted to the Ivy League. When she walked into classes at the University of Pennsylvania, she was no longer the big fish in the little pond. So when you have students from all over the world in your classes, it's graded on a bell curve at Penn, you're competing with the best of the best. And we are a little bit behind, I think, in that regard. So I do feel as though we need to use this time to look at our curriculum and look at some PISA reports and see where the United States compares with the rest of the world, and what do we need to reimagine in terms of how our students are learning, the length of time that they're spending on their studies, I think is another thing. Because one of the things, as a parent, even with my own daughter, I would like to see her doing more homework. I would like to see her reading more. I hosted some students last year not last year, but a few years ago from China, because at Lewiston Porter, we have an international program. And they stayed with me for a year. And one of the things they said is, they're in school 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. And it is very challenging in terms of curricular expectations and that sort of thing. I almost think that we do a lot of things very well in education here. One of the things that really came out with the pandemic is the disparities that children experience in schools, in our public schools. We have some children that rely on schools to be fed. We have children that rely on schools to be clothed. We have clothing closets. Some schools in inner cities have dentist office and have healthcare facilities within them. So we're doing a lot more than just teaching academics, but we also, I think, need to put a clear focus on academics and raising the expectations all around so that we can be competitive internationally.
Okay, now I just want to stop for a moment before we go to the next person. It's Susan, how did you want us to handle the questions? Do you want people to hold their questions, put them in the chat?
Yeah, I did. I'm sorry, I forgot to address that. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat, and I will interrupt at an appropriate time to present those questions, and we will save some time at the end. So if you want to unmute yourself at the end and you have some questions at the end of the program, we'll be able to do that. But for right now, please put your questions in the chat, and I will relay them to Marion and the panelists.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'll put the chat up there. Who would like to go next on the issue of the assessment of the status of education, where we go from here, and what did you learn in the process?
You gonna go,
So-
Dr. Eberly?
Yeah, let me jump in and
Okay.
Sam, keep your mic on, Sam, because I think you're going to, because I'm literally joining in with you right now, and I'm going to mention you because we have history together for almost 20 years. So for those on the panel and those who, I mean, no one actually knows me except for Sam and Mark, our psychologists, but I have a unique background in education. I'm in my 40th year of public life. I'm at 32 years in education, administration, 25 years, been in the city schools for 20. And I use Sam Radford as a perfect example of philosophical talks about the equities, the inequities, and the different elements. It's very, actually, that it was interesting. That's a fascinating comment that you had on the inequities and all the things, because we can talk about many aspects of students as far as where they are and where this all hit. But in all reality, as a principal, as many years as I've been, and I was a chief operating officer for the whole Buffalo schools for 3 years, also under Dr. Cash. So I was looking at it not only in the academic piece, but the immediacy of the safety of the students and the faculty and all personnel going into the schools and trying to see what would be the transition to get people back into the actual educational setting. So we had plant services, we had security, we had a lot of things to think about. So I had my COO hat on from 4 years ago, and immediately speaking as a principal in a building to look at how do we transition students back into the schools and look at it. Well, interesting things happen though. And I think this were the philosophical pieces. And Sam, I think you can allude to this too, what we used to talk about when I was at Grover Cleveland and all different schools. And we talked about inequities in urban education for years. And I would actually speak to people about what we really need is an implosion. This is years ago. I would say, the actual educational system is a 120-year-old archaic system based on an agricultural system in the United States. And it hasn't really changed. I mean, if we were in a time machine from 1900 and you had a medical doctor and a math teacher going forward to 2020, that medical doctor wouldn't be able to walk in the front foyer of a hospital, but the math teacher could still go in with a rows of desks and teach Pythagorean theorem. But we really haven't changed the actual concepts of regurgitating information out for curriculum and information instead of really getting into critical thinking and the transferable skills going into the higher ed. I feel bad for I'm going to call your daughter or your son. And Ashley, was it your daughter you said that was at Penn?
Yeah.
So, I call them, I met a professor up at Harvard, they call them the upper dogs. You had the upper dogs and the underdogs. I've been working with underdogs for 30 years that they don't have the opportunity at all in the first place to even get to that level because of the way that it's set up in different systems. Our system, I'm a little prejudiced when it comes to it because I've always been with the real tough kids and all the kids that really need the help. And I love that part of it, being a former police officer from years ago. But there's still some major disparities as far as how these kids get the access to these schools and what we did. The pandemic, in my opinion, actually was that implosion that we needed in one way to actually show that technology is here to stay. A hybrid method where we had students that thrived in a hybrid method or even in the virtual method, that they actually did well because they didn't have to worry about the actual environment of some of the schools and some of the things that were going on, the bullying and all. No one really has talked about any of that yet, as far as the offshoots of the bricks and mortar school, which wasn't working in the first place for many kids. And where virtual actually turned it around, where they actually got into their studies. It was really interesting. But unfortunately, I can see it even now. Everybody's talking about, let's get back to bricks and mortar. Let's get back to bricks and mortar. And I'm sitting there very progressive saying, no, we have to look at both. We have to look at this hybrid, not as the holistic, big picture of everybody's in it, but there's going to be a portion of society and the kids that can actually thrive from that. I think we have to keep that going into the mode of using technology to our advantage. My 2 cents.
Yeah, I think
If I can add to
Very
that,
good points.
I think it was Charles Dickens in A Tale of Two Cities that said it's the best of times and the worst of times.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you. I think the most important thing that happened in the pandemic was that we got a real chance to see, especially in urban education, how wide the disparity was. We knew that there was disparities before that, but now we really see how wide those disparities are. And so in a lot of ways, it was the worst of times. I mean, I don't know that it could be any worse. Our children in Buffalo Public Schools, the last children in New York State to get back to school. We didn't get into a hybrid model, as early as everybody else. We didn't even have all of our children didn't even have an iPad or whatever the device. They didn't have a device to learn on until November. And then we had internet connection problems. So it was the worst of time in terms of when you looked at the private schools and some of the suburban schools who they just picked up, and they just kept learning, at pace. And then you see we're just trying to figure out how to get kids a device and get kids internet connection and, and get kids into, to keep learning. I mean, it's just actually the worst case scenario. So the kids who are already behind, got left behind even further. You know what I'm saying? So to me, it was the pandemic just brought us to the worst of times. But I think Dr. Everly captured it very well. I think to a certain degree, we're also looking at potentially the best of times. And what I mean by that is that I think what we've learned in the pandemic is that we can meet every child where they're at. Every child does not need to go sit in the classroom 5 days a week to be educated. Some children learn better, remotely. They can self-pace. They don't have to deal with all the drama that goes on in the school building. If you put them in a remote setting and let them do their work, they have the support system and they will excel in that environment. Some kids don't need to go to school every day. Some kids can go to school a couple of days a week and learn in a hybrid model and be able to excel in that way. And some kids need to be in class every day, 5 days a week. But this gives us the option of meeting every child where they're at, meeting the needs of every parent in that regard. And now it also forces the infrastructure. Every teacher had to learn how to teach with the technology, whether they wanted to or not, whether the union protected them, or not. The contract couldn't stop you, and protect you from having to learn how to, use the technology to teach kids. So now everybody can use the technology. And I think that is the potential to the future. And then also because of the stimulus money, we probably we have more money coming to the district than ever has been in the district in its history. Probably 365 million additional dollars this year alone, over the next 3 years at least. On top of the $1.2 billion we already spend in urban education. There's, if money was ever an excuse, it's not an excuse anymore. We should have the money. We should have the experience coming from the pandemic to really do something different than we have been doing up until now, because what we were doing up until the pandemic wasn't working for urban settings. So now we have the potential actually to fix those things that wasn't working, because the whole thing essentially imploded, to use Dr. Eppley's words. We have the opportunity now to put it back together better than it was before the pandemic.
I'd like to jump in with Mr. Breen too, because I want to have another caveat for urban education. I'm glad he's here from Herman Badillo, because that's the other casualty of this, as far as it's one thing of the upper dogs, the suburban districts, or the underdogs, but then you have the underdogs of all the immigrant population, the bilingual students. I guarantee you he has some great stories to talk about the inequities of that part and what the challenges were for all that whole population in the urban setting.
Thank you.
Yes, just tell me when.
Right now, yeah.
You can go ahead.
Okay.
Ahead. If Sam Bradford is finished.
Okay.
You're okay? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I'm done.
Oh,
all right.
Okay. I'd like to say, thank you, for this opportunity to share about, our school population and how they, how they've been coming through this pandemic or suffering through. It was particularly hard. Now I'm speaking just as a school counselor. My children are older. I'm not a member of a board or anything like that. So I don't have a higher responsibility. My responsibility is working with those students from the two schools. But it was particularly hard for the younger students. Kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade even. The students that moved into third grade, they did not have an iPad before. When they were second graders, their parents had to come down to get one, register to get one, go down, pick them up. And that's for third, really third grade and down. And so those students did not have the opportunity to regularly work with the devices. The devices would come around to classrooms, but they didn't have a consistent opportunity to work with them. So it was very new. Then is very new to the parents. So last year, March, April, May, we have a platform, Class Dojo. The teachers going into the fall were.
Did we lose you?
He's frozen.
Yeah, I think you're frozen at this time. Shall we, can you make a correction on that? Susan, is it from our end or is it from Mr. Breen's end?
It's not our end.
Okay.
You can put it in the chat for him to reboot.
I just,
Yeah.
I want to.
Well,
jump
why
in
don't we
with-
go, I'm sorry, Ashley?
Go ahead. I just wanted to jump into.
We're having
in
a
terms
little
of where
trouble
do we go
hearing
from
you.
here. Okay.
I,
All right. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
We're very,
Mr. Breen is back.
Okay.
okay,
and Mr. Breen is back, and Ashley, was it something you wanted to say that?
Oh, I just wanted to add that in terms of where we go from here with the federal stimulus money, I'm hoping that school districts will, and I know at Grand Island, at Lewiston Porter, we're putting together summer school programs that really focus on skills that were lost or skills that need to be developed for students due to the pandemic. I'm hoping that that will continue well into the future so that students have more time in the classroom, especially those that need it. And I also hope that we use this federal stimulus money to have additional preschools for children. I think that's very important. Preschools that, yes, have some play-based education and social skill development, but curricular development as well to get students started out on the right track. And I just wanted to, mention too, I know we're talking about upper dogs and underdogs. My daughter was raised just by me as a single parent. So we were definitely underdogs, but she worked very, very hard to get to where she was, which was quite something to watch. But yeah, we started out, living at home with my parents, and just my daughter just worked really, really hard. And I think that that's another thing, when she did get to Penn, she said, geez, Mom, I used to be able to outwork the students in my class. She said, but the students here, not only can I not outwork them, but she noticed that she was needing to put in a lot more time to be able to keep up academically as well. And I think that's, just something that we need to look at, whether it's an urban or suburban school. We need to look at the curriculum and make sure that we're competitive with, we're competitive internationally as well as,
We'll go back.
nationally. That
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. We'll go back to Mr. Breen talking about the bilingual issues, especially for kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade.
Thank you.
You said the devices
So,
to parents.
Yeah, families that may have transportation issues, and if they're caring, they don't have a car and they have several children, that are not school age, to try to, maneuver a ride or whatever they need to go access. There was many challenges. And then the language challenge, to then try to help your child work with a device that you're not so familiar with either. And then the language on top of it, very, very challenging. So I think many of our families just said, this is too much. And, many tried, and the schools tried to support, and usually a school that has a bilingual program will have bilingual staff that can reach out and make phone calls. And I made a lot of phone calls and did deliveries of devices and so forth. But those families, just even coming out the door to go seek the help, et cetera, is a challenge for them because of the language. And so then we also have, many families from the former Burma, the Karennis. We have many African families who are, at least at a bilingual school, there's usually, some staff that could call and speak to these people, explain things and go through it step by step on the phone, which is what we were doing a lot in the fall. For those families, we would have to use language line. It's just a little bit more cumbersome to do all those kinds of things. So for those younger students and those families that were not using technology regularly, did not have a familiarity with it, they were, the most challenged with this. The older students that used to, that always had an iPad, they just could continue to use it. They had that familiarity. So much different situation. So moving forward, it's going to be critical, the differentiation. And that's where things are going to really have to be reimagined. How we had one little girl come back to 3rd grade, and she had missed because she wasn't connecting very much. And then the family took a trip to, someone was sick in Puerto Rico. The family went to Puerto Rico. She came back to school in the hybrid, and the class was in module 6 for math, and she had only gone up to module 2. She cried.
Way behind, yeah.
She was way behind, and she felt like, oh my God, how am I going to be able to do this? Her first day of school, we're thinking, yeah, hurrah, you're back and all of that, and such a challenge. So there's great variability of among the students, how much support they had. If their family was better in English, they could get, more resources, understand the technology better. So there's great variability. And I think, to start to deal with some of that is when they come back, a great deal of differentiation of the levels and the groupings. And so that's something that's going to be, I think, critical.
Sharon, we haven't heard from you. How would you answer your assessment of the children's education at this stage of the pandemic? And where do we go from here, and what did we learn?
A lot of things have been said already. There's so many challenges. I think we're still learning. I think we're still not, it's still not clear what changes are needed and what we actually, I think we're still learning about everything. It's going to be a while before we see the consequences, I think, of the last year. My children are in 9th and 11th grade, so they have different challenges with that. But I think there are some positives, and I think that every child does learn differently. It's something that you can see, I always say, as early as preschool or daycare, you see kids, how they gravitate towards things. I think it starts out really young. And some of the things that we learned, like that I have learned over the last year, is how my children learn. And, different environments, it's not like you keep saying, the brick and mortar. It's time to think about making some changes. I didn't think that both of my children would be better in a virtual setting, but it turns out that they are. And my son, who is in 9th grade, is definitely maturing. And I just, a matter of fact, told him today, I'm really proud of you for being able to control your workload and realize how important it is, and learning time management and things like that. So I think that he wouldn't have learned that as much. He was the kind of kid that you he does well in school, but you kind of gotta nudge him. And now there's less nudging because he has the freedom and the opportunity to make the choices of when he needs to do his work. It doesn't have to be between 8 and 2. If he needs a break for whatever reason, they all learn at different times, like we all do, right? As adults, like our attention span is better for, maybe some people are morning people, some people are night owls. So we all have our own, and I think they were able to express that a little bit more. And I think that helped. So, but I do think that we're still learning, and it's going to be quite a process to understand exactly what has happened over the last year. So.
Thank you. As we hear an assessment from the different perspectives here, we heard Mark say, I hope you don't mind me calling you by your first name, that it was he had a real appreciation for the parents struggling with this problem. We heard Ashley say that we're behind, whether it's behind the rest of the world, but we have to look at our curriculum. We heard Dr. Eberly say that, or I could call Dr. Eberly by his first name too, I think, that we are in a situation where we're still working with an agricultural system that's out of date. Sam described the worst of times and the best of times, and we've got a lot of money now. And it may not last. We just had a program on the problems municipalities are having. You get this influx of money, but it's not going to be there forever. So you have to plan accordingly. The difficulties with multilingual people, and we, as Mr. Breen said, and Sharon points out, that maybe this is an opportunity. The scale and speed of this move online caught many teachers and schools off guard. Did the pandemic highlight a gap in teacher education and professional development to be able to make these adjustments? What do you think? Is this an opportunity for change? Whoever would like to take this first. Yeah,
I'll take that one. So different perspective from being a parent, and different perspective from knowing many teachers in different districts, different capacities, from BOCES to grade school to high school teachers. I believe this has shown us that there is a need for education in that area. This goes back to something that I have had an issue with since my daughter went to high school, and I was at open house, and I literally wanted, she's in AP courses, and when I came home from open house, I literally said, I'm going to go in my closet and curl up in a ball right now, because every single teacher did something different. One teacher used Google Classroom, the other teacher was using a website, the other teacher wanted to do handwritten notes. And I said to my daughter, I'm like, how are you going to track this? Like, I can't, like, I'm supposed, as a parent, supposed to be like making sure you're on, on task, and I'm checking up, and I don't have anywhere to go. How am I going to be? And I'm a computer literate person. I can't imagine somebody that has a grandma that is guardian, or, an older person that is not tech savvy. I was frustrated and upset that they at that point couldn't even have a, like, everybody, let's get on Google Classroom. I mean, now we're there because they were forced to, but it's, I don't understand why it would have taken so long for even just district by district to say, this is how everybody has to do it. Let's have classes, let's meet. So I think that this has really pushed that in the right direction. And I'm grateful for that. At least we are all on one system now. Some, we don't have to worry about going to a PowerPoint presentation to see slides or et cetera, all these different formats. So I think in that regards, it's good, but it definitely showed, and they still need it because there are some that are still not good with it. And also we did have an issue with, I know everybody was forced into it, but that some teachers didn't want to be on screen or didn't have the technology, didn't know how to do it. So it definitely showed us that we are behind. So.
Now, what are the barriers to pushing us forward? Where do the barriers lie? What do you think?
Lie in the union contract.
Sam, what do you think, Sam?
Yes, Sam.
I think they lie in the union contract.
Okay, so some of that certainly has to do with union contracts, resistance. Others, what do you think?
Yeah, I think
Ashley?
that a lot of it has to do with providing, I think providing professional development.
We're having a lot of
teachers.
Others having a problem?
Essential.
Yeah,
And
Ashley.
it's sometimes it's the first thing that's cut. I know.
Ashley, we're having trouble hearing you at this time. We're having trouble hearing you, so I'm not sure what the problem is, but if you can adjust it. Mark, could we go ahead with you and see if, Ashley, if you can adjust whatever the problem might be. Mark?
Sure, yeah. I'll jump in.
Okay.
Ms. Whitfield mentioned that the implementation at first was not good. And I think that definitely cuts across districts. That was my experience as well. It was very disjointed. Every teacher was using a different platform. This is as a parent, my experience as a parent. Teachers were using different platforms, and it was very difficult. It's the old phrase of building an airplane while you're in midair. That definitely was the case. I don't think anybody had the foresight at the time that this hit the United States that this was going to go on for so long. So fortunately, it did get better over time. It sounds like in Grand Island for sure, and in Williamsville, I know that that's true as well. In terms of barriers, I'm speaking of my board that I'm familiar with in Williamsville. We experienced a leadership change as a result of leadership that couldn't get the job done during the pandemic. We actually had a plan presented to us by our superintendent that did not involve remote learners. There was no way for them to service remote learners at the start of the school year. And that was just totally unacceptable for us. And we put our superintendent on leave. So with the tumultuous experience of negotiating a termination for a superintendent and finding a temporary replacement, and now hiring a new superintendent, the focus of our board, at least, is not in the right place right now, I don't think, which is where it should be, is on what we can do to look at the situation and make the positive changes that everyone's been mentioning. So I know just on Williamsville's level, at least, we don't have that focus at this point, since we've gone through so many different leadership changes. Our board is not sitting around discussing these issues at a high level. So I wish it were different, because I think there are opportunities to make positive changes.
So we have union contracts, as Sam mentioned. We have issues of leadership, as Mark mentioned. We've got, I think, in a way, what Sharon mentioned, you have, much as it is in any other organizational environment, we have generational differences. We have people of different ages doing things in different ways. And somehow, do we need a more realistic conversation about digital technology and the fact that there may be some limits in digital technology? I mean, there's something that irreplaceable about students and teachers coming together to learn in person. But how can we resolve this? See, I want a perfect answer. Okay, how can we resolve? This is an opportunity. We need changes. Digital technology was forced on people, and perhaps it was an opportunity. However, the way it was done was probably done more out of need than out of a strategic plan. So what do you think? Where do we go from here? Whose job is it to see that we make use of this opportunity? What do you think? Kevin, William Breen, others?
Kevin, you're muted.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I can jump in. I'm going to go back to what I've been speaking of this for many years, and it really comes down to actually Peter Senge's work from 35 years ago, talking about the fifth discipline and saying that we have to look at, everybody having a shared vision, mental model of what we really need, and systemically, how do we actually bring that all together? And unfortunately, the system itself is broken as far as, but we've accepted it because it's been around for 50, 60 years. I mean, you look at the comprehensive high school of the 1950s, it started off, there was all large schools, warehousing students to educate society. And we've come full swing where so many people are coming out with small learning communities, smaller schools. You can see even in the city of Buffalo, we've changed the structure of our schools. We have schools that had 1,500 students in the schools that now maybe have 4 or 5 in those same buildings. So just the repurposing of buildings, the repurposing of the actual faculty members and the different things going on. And I agree with Sam to a certain extent of some things when it comes to the dogma of the different teachers contracts, administrator contracts, all the different things that are out there. Those are all impediments for us to actually have that shared vision and to actually have someone orchestrate it. I mean, it's, you have a maestro in front of a philharmonic, orchestrating the individual instruments, but the instruments themselves play together. We have a whole bunch of people playing in silos, and so you'll have teachers that have been hermetically sealed in classrooms for years that now with this pandemic they've had to come out of that. I mean, to the point where there's been some major impediments. I mean, you're going into people's homes. You're actually seeing students in living rooms and in bedrooms, and that's why a lot of people have a difficult time seeing where students aren't coming on screen, because a lot don't want to show their house on screen or know what's going on in the houses. So there's a lot of dilemmas in this whole piece of the virtual world that I still believe it's here to stay to the good. But to bring it all together, it's a $64,000 question to say we have to have a systems change. We have to have it. Mark and I talk about all the time, him being a board member, Sam, being an advocate for years, fighting for the students and equity in the city of Buffalo. We still have the school board concept in this country where it's separated, especially in the Big Five, it's separated where you don't have government officials actually in charge of the school system, even though the governor can actually, in the state of New York, run the Board of Regents, but the Board of Regents is a separate entity, the state ed's a separate entity. So other states have different solutions to it, and I think that's what we need to start looking at, and it's tough because it's sort of like the small little municipalities of the whole state of New York. I mean, look at everybody's, you have the councilmen, you have the mayors, everybody has their own little niches, and it's tough when it comes to the educational system to bring that all together in one system to try to say, we have to work together and collectively look at how we change this whole system of education. As everybody's saying and alluding to, there's many different ways to be able to teach people, different times to, as you say, Sharon, it was great, talking about your own. I mean, that's really candid. I mean, as far as saying virtual is actually working in one house where some people are saying, oh my God, it's been a disaster. So, we have to weigh that all out, but you have to have a shared vision and you have to have the systems thinking piece. And to bring that together, that's the quandary we're in right now. That's a difficult answer.
Yet the close down of schools and the rapid switch over to online illustrated how flexible our educational system can be. It may not have been done perfectly, but a switch was made. Is that possible to make a switch? I mean, it might take a long time to get this shared vision and these separate entities coming together in the shared vision. Is it possible? It could be. Where does it start? Mark.
I think, by the way, when you summarized my thoughts, I thought it was perfect. You're like issues of leadership. And I think that's where it starts. It's the leaders of the school district. It's the superintendent. It's the school board. They have to talk about these things and have discourse around these changes and decide what the priorities are for moving forward. And if that can be done, then as Mr. Radford mentioned, then contracts can be negotiated that facilitate these types of changes that may not exist right now in the contracts that are there. Money can be deployed in the proper directions to make the changes necessary, but it has to start at the top. It can't really be a grassroots effort, in my opinion.
I think it has to be a top-down, bottom-up approach to it. I agree with you that leadership, really has to set the pace. But I think there's also listening to Ashley earlier and Sharon now, kind of talking about there has to be a push from parents talking about what their needs are. There has to be, in that shared vision, there have to be understanding the larger context of what we're trying to do with education. Sometimes I get concerned that education, at least in Buffalo, becomes more about employment than educational outcomes. We get preoccupied with providing people job security and meeting employee needs at the expense of educational outcomes. You know what I'm saying? And I think and when you have cities like Buffalo where you have such a high concentration of poverty, and to expect parents to be like the parents of the people who are teaching them, or to have the same expectations of the people who are coming into the city to provide them, an education, is just an unfair expectation. And we're never going to get to a place where we get them into a shared vision if they don't understand where each other is coming from, in a real way, and that's a very difficult task. I mean, it's hard for people to walk in the shoes of other people and understand their reality when they have to live in their own reality. And I think we saw that in this particular case where teachers were at home with their kids trying to teach, people who were, in way worse circumstances. But it's hard to be sensitive to that when I'm here trying to teach your kids and I got to have my kids in the house. And so that's the kind of, we got to come up with a solution that's relative to the actual circumstances we are in. Like Dr. Utley said, you can't ship this in models from other places because we have to create something based on the people who are in the experience.
Do you think this experience of online learning during COVID-19 would lead to a more careful future planning? I mean, people had a forced experience that they might not have had otherwise. And there's a question here from Marlene. Should we implement a virtual learning for some and an in-class learning model for other children? Would that be more appropriate? And how would we, should it be hybrid? I mean, it was a challenge for teachers to deal with certain days of the week you were doing one thing, other days of the week you were doing another thing. That would require more training for teachers. So we've got teacher training, shared vision, leadership, contractual arrangements. Is this an ideal time for moving in a new direction?
Definitely. It's definitely an ideal time to move in it with the technology and what Mr. Radford was just alluding to also, and going back to the shared vision. We have. I'm actually. I think I'm going to be the only one in the district that actually is going to a technological tool, because I just happen to be teamed up with the company that did our thermal cameras, Inc. Lab, over in East Aurora. That we have these CMSs, these communication media centers, that is a full screen camera and computer, where it can actually be part of the classroom for those who are at home while the students that are in the classroom. So it's a seamless type classroom where it's not looking at just where we are right now. We got a bunch of heads on a screen right now just talking, where you have a total interactive classroom. It's already out there. We've had people that have been on medical leave for months and years that have been remote. It's just not promoted. Now that we have this situation we've been in this past year, that needs to come to the forefront. My worry with it, though, is that you still see people like, oh, well, today's the first day where you can take your mask off. And, oh, when we go back to the other, what's going to be normal again, and all the debate of what is going to go back, where people, it's almost like they're licking their chops to say, let's get back to brick and mortar because that's the normal world. And I'm telling you, for 30 years, I've been in the world that is not normal of the way that our structured education system is set up. Again, going back to the inequities, even in our own city. I mean, you can see, and Sam and I, we could go on and we could write a book about it as far as the inequities, as far as different students, different schools, different opportunities. And if you're born over on Dode Street or Goodyear, your opportunity to go to Olmsted is like 1 in 10. And because you take a test when you're in kindergarten, it's like, wow, here's someone that's going to be great in high school and is predetermined. I mean, that's what really, and that's across the country in a lot of urban settings, that they have nots type thing. And I think that's been my battle cry of trying to implode that. And I think we've started to see that we can use the technology and get out there and have both. You could basically have the hybrid. And unfortunately, when it's going back to what Sam was saying and what Mark was saying, from top down or bottom up, there has to be some kind of morphing of that, because let's face it, I mean, the average urban superintendent in the country right now is 3.5 years existence. I mean, we've had 2 superintendents in the last 12 years, 6 years each, between Dr. Williams and Dr. Cash. That's the longest probably in the history of any urban Big Five, definitely the Big Five in New York. But it's not like the suburban districts where you have a longevity there. But so that vision, that change, all that actually really puts a whole kink in the whole operation, because the vision changes with whoever that leader is. So there has to be, I think, both the top down and the grassroots to saying, we got to start talking for everybody, for the different populations of students, as we were saying, as Mr. Breen was saying, with the whole immigrant population, the whole bilingual population. I mean, all the ones that are disadvantaged from the get-go. And that's what we have to just have some other committee coming in, and another movement to, there's a lot of movements in this country right now. We should have an educational movement, and the timing is right now because of the pandemic, because there's a lot of lost time this year for sure.
So should school principals be better prepared for future disruptions, so that their vision and goals should be addressing some of what we're talking about here, and addressing some of these inequities? I'd like to hear a little more from William Breen on how we can, with a bilingual or multilingual population of students who have difficulties just adjusting to this culture, but then to the education, and then to the pandemic. How does one deal with those inequities? There are multiple inequities, as I'm sure the Black, brown population would have some of these inequities. What guidance would you give to a leader?
Well, I mean, with the building-based budget vote and so on, building leaders try to work with the monies that the school is allocated to meet the needs of the students. So at Mambadillo, there's a lot of language groups, and so the whole day is planned around the groupings. You know, our lowest level of English group and our next level and our next level. So and then trying to staff around that within the monies given to the school. So that's, you know, the most fundamental way building principals tried to meet the needs in their school. Dr. Eberly would be, you know, much more prepared probably to talk about that. But resources are so important. Having the right kinds of teachers, the support services, to be able to get to every single level. Very challenging.
Kevin? Or Kevin, you have some answers
someone-
to that, or Sam? Or-
Someone else, yeah, no, I'm dominating. Someone else. Go ahead, Mark. Ashley, go ahead.
Ashley.
Or
Well,
some of our
I would like to speak.
questions.
I would like
Yes,
to speak about
Ashley, is
teachers
it
for a
working
minute,
now?
because I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
much better.
I would like to speak about teachers and unions for a moment, because I think that a lot of times whenever there's a problem, it either gets dumped on schools or teachers get blamed for it. And teachers want professional development. Teachers would love to have quality professional development. We need the policymakers to pay for it. And we also need the administrators to organize high quality professional development. So if the expectation is there that teachers will Zoom with classes and have Google Meets, you know, I don't know any teacher that would say, oh, I don't want to learn that. You know, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to learn that. Teachers want those kinds of things. It's just a matter of having it organized and provided for. I know at Grand Island, we delivered thousands of one-to-one personal devices. Thousands. There were grade levels upon grade levels that didn't have their one-to-one devices yet, either because every school district in the country was trying to order Chromebooks, order iPads, and they were on back order. But as they came in, we scheduled our buses to go out to houses. We scheduled our drivers. We delivered thousands of one-to-one devices to our students. We did everything within our power to ensure that students had access to those devices and were able to participate. And we had our technology staff, you know, on call. They were working around the clock to provide teachers with whatever assistance they needed to be able to get into Google Classroom, organize Google Meets or Zooms or whatever support they needed. You know, we were providing it. But it's, you know, it's a challenge in terms of you need to be able to have the technology, get it to students. But we already know which parents are able to come into school. We already know if we're in a school district where we'll have an open house and 20% of the parents will show up. So why aren't we organizing buses to have the parents experience what it's like to ride on the school bus to school if we know that they can't get there? We already know that. A lot of these things we already knew. It's just a matter of getting our leaders and our policymakers to do something about it, to put the money where it needs to be and to organize the professional development for teachers. But to say that, you know, unions are a major roadblock to professional development, I don't know any union that wouldn't want their teachers to have high quality professional development. I know of a lot of people that wouldn't want to pay for it. And I know of a lot of people that wouldn't be able to organize it. But I think that teachers want that. And, you know, parents want that for their students as well. So those are things moving forward we need to do. We need to ensure we have high quality professional development for teachers. We need to make sure we have what Dr. Eberl said, we have an opportunity gap here. We have students that are well opportunityed, and then we have students that are not. And we need to ensure that every child, regardless of your zip code, has opportunities. Because that's what, you know, my kids growing up, I was a teacher, I didn't make a lot of money when they were young. They didn't have a lot of toys, they didn't have a lot of fancy clothes, but my kids had opportunities. I put my money in the opportunities for my kids, whether it was a tutor or whether it was, you know, extra help that they needed with academics. And those are the things we need to ensure that we provide our students extra help after school, summer programs, one-to-one devices. Moving forward, we need to ensure students have those opportunities regardless of where they live.
Okay, thank you for that. We have the issues of the inequities though, so that going back to what Sam said, walking in other people's shoes, and what William Breen said, I've never, I did work on the West Side, but still, it's not walking in other people's shoes. So there's a certain amount of sensitivity that's needed. There were some upsides to what happened. Susan at the beginning mentioned a PBS program on YouTube that highlighted the disruption and the effect of the pandemic on students. So students in their own words said things like, I missed going to school. It is so weird. We're looking out for each other, they said. This was a change in their personal life, but there were some fresh ideas. And they asked, is this the new normal? They thought the mental health was like a roller coaster. They wanted children to be heard. Well, it sounds as though children have to be heard, parents have to be heard, teachers have to be heard with fresh ideas. I want to ask about some of the issues we've read about, the absenteeism, the dropouts. Some people choose not to go back to school at all. Tell us about some of these problems that you didn't experience before, or you didn't experience to this magnitude. What are some of those issues? Sam, were you aware of some of those?
Mark, you was gonna say, I'll follow you. Go ahead. Mark has his hand raised.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mark, I missed it.
Okay, thanks. By the way, I like the picture of Obama in your office there. So definitely in our school, which Dr. Eberle is the principal of, he organized us into teams this year because of the pandemic to more adequately address the needs of the students. And we now have something called advisory, where each staff member has a small number of students that they're responsible for, maybe 8, 9, 10 around there. And we make weekly contact with the students and their families to find out what needs that they have and what we can help with to get them on track. I was given a particularly difficult group of students kind of on purpose. But you know, just because.
Dr. Eberle is smiling.
Yeah,
I'm smiling because I got to give the best to the best, you know, and the toughest one is being a school psychologist. You know, I knew what I was doing.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But definitely among the students that I was working with, there were a few students that have these issues that you're discussing. There's one student whose mom was really struggling to get him to do any work. And, you know, I would call and talk to her about strategies and she would give her best shot at it, and it just never came together for them, unfortunately, despite what we tried. There was also a girl whose mom experienced the same thing with her kids that had just given up. So we keep plugging away at it, and try to get in touch every week and see what we can do and what other things we can try. But definitely that is happening during the pandemic. There are successes where students that we heard about earlier, where students aren't dealing with some of the difficulties of school life, and that's enabling them to excel academically. But there are also the tragedies of students that have just given up during this time, unfortunately.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I was just going to say a similar thing, just working for an anti-poverty agency and seeing the children of parents who already were dealing with limited resources, who are now dealing with the consequences of a pandemic, and just their inability to, keep their children engaged. And, seeing children walking up and down the street during school hours, and I don't want to get into a position where it's a blame game, but the district wasn't very forthcoming about the number of students that were just what we lost track of. And there was a significant number of students that, that just were not logging in, and we were not keeping up with. That I believe that if we were, as a district in Buffalo anyway, more transparent about that, we could have used more community resources to get them children engaged, as opposed to just, let, 10, 15, 20% of the students, lose track of that, and this ain't only going on in Buffalo. I was talking to a downstate superintendent that said they lost track of as many as 30% of the students. I mean, so those numbers, but, I'm just talking about a number, but when you meeting these kids out on the street and it's real life, especially the high school kids who are now, gang affiliated, or they caught up in a group of people that they're surviving with, where now there's school is not even something you think about anymore. You know what I'm saying? It's out of the equation of one of the things you can use to help keep them on track, because it's remote school, and then community centers was closed because of the pandemic, so you couldn't even pull them in the community centers. People were not inclined to bring people into their house because of the pandemic. So those students, if they weren't learning in their home, and then all those homes weren't very safe places, that was it. Those students you lost. And for me, we don't talk about that enough, and we don't have a comprehensive plan to go out and identify and get those students and figure out interventions on how we use this money that's coming in to get those students, get them back on track. And that concerns me.
If I can jump back in, and I want to, what you're saying, Sam, is so true of the words that we need to really start talking about that haven't been around. It has to be transparency and trust. And I want to go back to what Ashley was alluding to, as far as, the ideas of teachers, unions, and separating that out. As Mark was alluding to, what we have structured over at MST with our advisories. As I said, I've been doing this over 30 years as far as in schools administration, and I would put this staff up against anyone as far as what they've done just to get those kids on the grid. Like Sam, you're saying, the ones that are missing in action, 10, 15, 20%. It's an amazing sight to see a whole entire collective group of teachers going out there collectively saying, okay, who's missing? We literally had a green, yellow, red list of who was totally off the grid through, even up to this point, just in the last month. I actually, myself personally, as the principal, showed up. I don't know if Mark even knows the story. It said it's because the young man just showed up today, and here's a story that is many times over. I mean, lost his mother last year. She passed away. The father's incarcerated. The sister disowned him. He's a senior at 18 years old, and he's working full time all day long to afford a $700 a month apartment on the west side at 18 years old, and he hasn't graduated from high school. I find this all out. I literally go to the McDonald's on Walden Avenue. He's not even in the city. He's got to go to where he has relatives that can pay the money where he has 40 hours a week to afford just to live as an 18-year-old. So we've changed the whole entire structure of his day around, where his school day literally is at night because he's working in the daytime, and we've shifted it around. The look on the whole entire employment of McDonald's when I come walking in thinking, who is this guy walking in here? And they found out I was the principal of this student. They were blown away by it. But those things we're doing at schools, and it's just not us in this school. I mean, a lot of schools, a lot of faculty out there that are really remarkable. And it's beyond union contracts. It's beyond all this stuff. It's all about teacher, student, administrator relationships and that transparency to get these kids back on the grid. That's a critical piece. And that actually isn't being stated out there. You have a little bit of here, good stories telling, this is what this teacher's doing here and that. It's much bigger, but there are still a lot missing in action, without a doubt, as you say, Sam, as far as the district of really having the resources and the money they have. It's been a little discouraging as far as really helping out, which politically incorrect me saying that, but I had to say it.
I'd like to hear from the rest of you who have not commented. If you don't want to put your question into the chat, if you would raise your hand and unmute yourself, we'd be happy to have you ask a question. And I wanted to go back to something that Marlene said about, and I think Kevin has explained that to some extent, the flexibility of providing for specific needs of specific students, if that's possible, because there were some upsides in that PBS program where some students said that they were doing better with the remote learning, especially those who look different from the others in school, or they may have been bullied, or there may have been other issues at school where they feel no one is bothering me and I'm more independent and I do better with remote learning. I feel freer. I feel freer if I look different from others. And you've mentioned personalized schooling. And so there may be more creative methods used during remote learning that should be incorporated in the future normal. You know, we're looking back to normal, but maybe it is a new normal. What do you think about that? Opportunities for new normals? About hearing from the rest of the audience or from the presenters? Please just raise your hand if you don't want to type it in.
I think I said it earlier. I mean, I think there's a real opportunity for new normals. And let me go back to something that Ashley said earlier. I think it's really important to note that this is really not about blaming anybody. You know, we all have to take responsibility for what's going on with our children in education. I used to be a teacher. I taught 7th and 8th grade math. You know, I walked in those shoes. I understand what that's like. But I do think we have to be honest about the fact that you know, based on, you know, how union contracts are constructed, it's almost like all teachers are the same. And in no profession is everybody the same. There are ranges, you know, in terms of quality of teachers. And this is not like a factory, you know, this is a profession. You know, some people put more in it and get better results than other people. And when we protect the lower end of that, you know, the lower end of those as if they're top performers or top performer, I think we hurt the whole craft. That's just my particular perspective on it. But the larger question is, I think what the League of Women Voters is doing tonight is the part of the most important thing that can happen at this point. I think this conversation is between, and like Dr. Everly, I've been doing this for 30 years. This conversation, the group of people that's in it is too small. This needs to be a taxpayer conversation. You know what I'm saying? You know, all taxpayers need to be concerned with the educational outcomes that we are getting. It needs to include the student voice. They need to have a say-so about how they're affected by the education they're getting. We can't drown them out because, contractually they're getting a survey or an evaluation from a student is not a qualified person. We have to know what our students feel about the quality of the people who teach them. We have to be able to have taxpayers engage in that conversation and not protect them because politically you can, endorse everybody in the school board and control the voice of the superintendent by deciding who the school board, but by the school board deciding who that is, and we get caught up in the politics of the situation, and taxpayers are on the outside of that. I think what the League of Women Voters is doing by making this conversation, accessible to a larger part of the community, so more people in the school system know the details of what's going on. Because unless you up close on this, it's like Dr. Levy said, most people don't have any idea, what's going on in those buildings, you know what I'm saying, and the challenges, and they don't know the good stories or the bad stories, you know what I'm saying? They just they get nips, bits and pieces of it from the news, and then when your child is out of school, you're almost out of the conversation altogether. You know what I'm saying? You don't even you don't even factor it anymore. And it's probably the time you should factor it the most, because the institutional knowledge you have as a seasoned taxpayer, seasoned person in this community, is probably what's most helpful to bringing about the positive change that's going to be needed. Because I really believe we have the possibility of educating all students, and I think that's really possible. But because everybody's not in the conversation, we don't get there.
Yeah, what was said at the very beginning, where you suddenly discover by having to teach your 6-year-old, as Mark mentioned, and you realize the difficulties that teachers have. Mark, yeah, Lee Tetkowski wanted to comment next, and then the next Mark did. Okay, Lee, you're muted.
Lee, oh, there you go.
I was deeply moved by the program last night, and many things, pop up in my head right now, listening to your comments. This is not really a question. One of the things that I remember best is about the girl who used the word microaggressions that I am familiar with hearing. But this is from a high school kid about 16 who said that she especially likes not dealing with microaggressions all day long at high school. And we have got to face that somehow when things go back to the real school situation, which will happen. There must be more that can be done to avoid so many kids feeling unsafe and unhappy. So how can they concentrate on their work? And another instance from last night that maybe those who watched it remember, that was so touching. An 18-year-old boy didn't show up at school for a long time. And when I guess one of the teachers found him after trying hard, what had happened in this particular case was he came from a single mom situation with younger siblings. And when he didn't have to go to school, his mother took on more hours so he could do childcare and housework. And I'm just, amazed that we have to face the fact that that goes on too. So the school helped him reorganize his mother's job and so on, so that he did return to school. Another thing that I think we ought to mention is when teachers were asked to use one word to describe their feelings about the year that just passed teaching, exhausted, tired, sleepy, nervous. And I know teachers myself who are very dedicated and works very hard teaching themselves the techniques that nobody else taught them. And they're always tired. And they still have lives to try to lead, maybe with their own preschoolers or school-age children.
Yeah.
So on the other hand, I happen to have a great grandchild in California who loves the way the last year went. She apparently has a terrific teacher, and she is a high academic achiever and likes following directions and reading and studying. And her teacher has been giving her very, very good individual assignments to keep her challenged because she's way behind the other kids in her age group. And maybe if it weren't online, that wouldn't have been possible as well. So those are just a few of my thoughts.
Thank you. That's good. I don't know, Mark, did you have something? You had your hand up, but
Oh, sure. Yeah, it was kind of about the previous comments, so it's not really going to address anything that Lenore said necessarily. But you mentioned, me being at home teaching a 6-year-old with, I'll give you the particulars of my situation. I'm at home, my wife's at home. We have tons of technology. We have a grandparent on call that we can have come over and help if we need to. And I started thinking about all these resources that we have available and how difficult it was, despite all of these resources that we have available. 2 college educated parents, all that. So the equity issue is real because I felt like we weren't doing enough for my child with all those resources. And I can't imagine a single parent who doesn't have the assistance of a grandparent, somebody who doesn't have the technology that we have available to us, any of those resources that they may not have. And as Sam said, you have to be able to walk in somebody else's shoes, which, I'm not able to do that exactly, but, I can think about it a little bit and try to guess how much more difficult the situation is for someone that doesn't have those resources. But now the child that's in the situation with less resources, I think, is almost certainly going to be at an educational disadvantage starting next school year after having spent all of this time in that disadvantaged situation. And where do we go from there with that particular child who's going to need so much assistance just to get right back up to speed? It's a difficult problem.
some of these issues clearly existed before the pandemic. When we took a tour, the education committee took a tour of Lafayette High School, some of the other schools, especially where they had language difficulties. They had special classes, but some of the people did not attend those special after-school classes because they had babysitting responsibilities. So some of these problems existed before, and we've simply raised the consciousness about them, I think. When people are absent or people have gone through this pandemic with unequal kinds of learning, it will affect the way they enjoy school when they come back. How are we going to handle this in the transition? That all these inequities that existed before the pandemic, and now we have more inequities with differences in learning styles, parental difficulties, devices not being there. absenteeism, the upsides probably don't balance out the downsides. What are we going to do now?
I think actually coming back from the pandemic, you're going to have, that's going to work in both ways. You got a whole group of students that are excited about going back to school. Excited about, they miss school. They miss the social interaction of school. Students who didn't, who appreciate it on a whole nother level now. You also got a more effective way of when students are not in school for them not to fall behind. Because just because a student is not in the school building, they can still get the learning now because people have a way of remote learning that's realistic, and you can measure it, and you can engage them. You can engage parents that you used to, because they didn't show up to the building. They kind of, you didn't have them engaged. Now, because you can engage parents remotely and have them be part of what's going on remotely, you have some opportunity that way. But I agree 1000% that even with all this money coming in, the money does not create the solution for how you're going to make up for the learning loss, and how, when everybody else was moving forward, our kids were actually moving backwards by and large. It's something that I think the most important thing we can do is pay attention. Just pay attention to where kids are at, get a really good baseline, do some assessment, get a really good baseline, and really use the resources to give multiple levels of intervention, from intensive tutoring to summer classes to after school to community-based enrichment resources. I mean, bringing into church partnerships and other community-based and not-for-profit partnerships into the equation, and really have an intensified effort to make sure we catch every student up.
Good points. Good series of points.
I'd like to comment, if I could, about something that I saw very frequently, which was the parents who were working, or very many, a great deal of single moms, get up early, go to work, say, good morning, make sure you go on today. When I'm connecting with these parents to call them, they're finding out, no, my child hasn't been taking any, connecting to class for 2 weeks now. So a lot of these kids that are dropping off, their parents are working, and they say, yeah, everything is fine. And so a lot of that has been going on. And the parent, some of them have said to me, what am I going to do? I can't quit my job. I'm not going to leave my job because that's what feeds us. I'm, to stay home and make sure, my 2 children are connecting and so on. So these are very difficult things. And I wonder how that's going to affect our young people. The fact that, like the school is one of the social structures, in a young person's life. And here they are, mom knows and can't get them to work. They know tomorrow mom's leaving and she'll go to work, and I'm going to pretend I get on for a second, but then and eventually they know that mom's going to find out, but they're still not doing it. What's that going to do to the relationships and so on? And what does that do, for all of our children that have gone through this phase where, even adults don't feel like doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, turn off their camera and do something else. One of our 4th graders had his camera on, but he's playing a video game. The teacher could see the video game reflected in his glasses.
Oh my goodness.
He's yeah, Mom, I'm on, Mom, I'm doing everything I should. So, kids are I mean, this is going to be a huge impact on our young people for many years. And those who are already a few steps behind are going to be even more behind because of their challenges, et cetera. So this is huge. This is a very huge thing, that the challenge that we face. I just want to comment on that.
That's a very good point. Haven't heard again from Sharon and of course from some of the league people. And I get the feeling that we're looking hard for solutions because not only do we have the problems that existed pre-pandemic, but we have more problems now. And engaging the parents, engaging the teachers, engaging students. Dollars don't create the solutions. There's much more to it than that. What do you think going back? Sharon, any ideas? You had 2 teenagers, right?
Correct. I think what everybody's been saying is that we need most importantly, there's more people that need to be in on this conversation. And I know there are people that I asked to be involved in this, and they had already said from different districts, they are on board members and different panels, and it is being discussed. Topics are being discussed, but how do we really across the country, have these discussions and have these panels of students and parents and educators and everybody that can actually make changes. So
I think early on, Kevin mentioned something, I'll get Kathleen, but Kevin mentioned something about I believe it was you, other countries, what other places in the world are doing. I mean, this was a worldwide pandemic. Are there good role models elsewhere? Kathleen?
Well, we must be on the same wavelength because my question is, we have 27 different school districts in Erie County, something like that. How much cross discussion is going on? Certainly, I mean, we have people here from a few different districts, Buffalo, Williamsville, Grand Island, but how much is this being looked at as a bigger issue instead of just these, these school districts? Are ideas being shared on how to address these issues?
So I'll address that question. Our superintendent, Dr. Brian Graham, met regularly with the Erie County superintendents, with Dr. Fusco. She is superintendent of Erie 1 BOCES, and they met regularly to discuss how they were handling the pandemic, whether it was the hybrid model, the remote students, and also to interpret the regulations from the state education department and from the health department. So they worked together to try to figure things out in terms of knowing which direction they needed to take and then being on the same page as well. So superintendents have meetings regularly to discuss everything from, different ideas that they're doing within their school district, but also in terms of the pandemic, they were having Zoom meetings regularly with Dr. Fusco and deciding, what is the best course of action, or working together to interpret some guidance that was coming from different places. So we were receiving guidance from the New York State Health Department, the Erie County Health Department, the New York State Education Department. And as a public school district, we need to follow, the New York State Education Department regulations. We need to make sure that we are in compliance. So just to give people listening an example, we purchased tents to put up outside of each of our buildings. And we had to have a training in order to be able to put up the tents. And that's for student safety, so that the tent doesn't fall down and hurt a student. So there are regulations. We had parents coming to our board meetings saying, I don't know why you can't figure this out. I don't know why you're not renting space all over the island and renting out the Golden Age Center and renting out the old Holiday Inn. Why aren't you finding more space so that all students can go to school. And I'm thinking, don't they realize there's fire codes? There's certificates of occupancy that need to be had. So yes, to answer your question, superintendents are talking to one another. They're talking in Zoom meetings. They're meeting with Dr. Fusco. They're sharing ideas. And boards of education, yes, they've thought of, you know, different things to be able to do to bring all students back, but it's not as simple as just renting a space somewhere.
I know I wasn't, that's all
Right.
very good, but what I was really thinking about is the techniques of how you deal with the, you know, the single parents who are at work and they think their kids are, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Some of the techniques that the teachers need to be using. Is
Yeah.
there a cross fertilization there of good practices? And I mean, I know I understand that they would, in terms of the administrative things of that there would be communications, but I'm talking about more the techniques is what I was
Professional
really
development. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're also sharing techniques in terms of, I know someone had mentioned before about a student not showing up for 2 weeks on Zoom. You know, how do you get students to comply? How do you get them to show up on a Zoom? What do we need to do in order to bring all students back and participate in this virtual environment? And how are we going to do that? How are we going to mitigate those types of issues? Districts do talk to one another, superintendents talk to one another, they attend trainings together. So there is, we've even had from other districts where at Lewiston Porter, we've brought in a speaker that another school district would bring in the afternoon to present to teachers to cost share that way. So districts do cross, I think you said cross-pollinate or cross-fertilization. They do have that sharing of ideas. And it does happen. It's just, you know, every district is different in terms of the amount of funding that they have to spend on the ideas, and also the capacity to be able to implement different ideas is different across districts throughout Western New York.
Mark had his hand up. You wanted to say something?
Sure, pretty much Ashley said most of what I wanted to say. I'm not necessarily aware that the ongoing issues are being discussed at this point, the issues of learning loss or the issues of equity. I think this is so unprecedented and so difficult for schools to deal with that districts and superintendents are just trying to get through it in a way that's safe for everyone and tries to maximize the amount of time that students have in school. But I don't think that those issues have been addressed yet. Of course, I don't know that to be the case. Our superintendent gives us some feedback about those meetings with Dr. Fusco, with Erie One BOCES, and it more or less seems procedural at this point, you know, as to how to get kids back into school as effectively as possible. But I don't think the other issues are necessarily being addressed as far as I know.
Yeah, that would be my impression from Kathleen's question, that you were looking at resolution of problems that are continuous, that we've simply raised the consciousness of people about them at this time, so that if these meetings that Ashley mentioned are going on, that they should be going on after the pandemic, so that you're dealing with these continuous problems, not just pandemic related problems. Other comments? I'll be turning it over to Susan.
I would just like to comment something I forgot to mention before, I think is significant, is that Child Protective Services, who we would call typically if there's, you know, chronic excessive absences, they are knocking on doors and talking with parents, but they are not taking any families to court during the pandemic. You know, I kind of think that's good and merciful, because if if family is having a challenge already, all kinds of different challenges, throw them into court because they can't manage some technology or childcare or whatever amount of problems that they're having. But that was a significant tool sometimes as a leverage for, you know, some of our most challenging situations where attendance was an issue, the threat of court. So that was something that is very different also about this year. And I don't think necessarily in a bad way, because mercy was really needed throughout this.
Can I say
Yeah.
something else, please?
Lee, go ahead, Lee.
Since every child has suffered this last year in unique ways, I am trying to visualize when they do return to in-person schools, how art teachers, since I happen to be a retired art teacher, and English teachers and many others need, I believe, very desperately to encourage creative expression on the part of these individual kids. And I think, you know, for everybody's mental health, I think that is a kind of a positive thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. An opportunity to relay from their perspective their feelings. Susan, I'll hand it back over to you. I don't know if we have, Terry has.
We got to get Terry in here. Terry wants to say a few things, and then I'll wrap up just saying a few things after Terry.
All right, I especially want to thank the panel for coming and sharing your experiences and your insights. It has been a very difficult year for families and for children, but it's also, we also have to remember that children are resilient, and we need to remember that. I think in everything that we do, the resilience, and let's hope that adults are resilient also, but that's an important thing to consider and to remember as we go forward. And this, the word behind really bothers me, because of course things are not the same as they would be if we had not been in the pandemic. And everyone is in the same situation. So what are you behind? Are you behind in the artificiality of grade level? And it is artificial, it is an administrative tool. It has nothing to do with how people learn, as any of us who are in education or have been education know. So it has been slowed for people. Definitely, I'm sure it has been slowed for many students, not all, but many students, and not all in the same way. But so it is a challenging time, but we have very strong people and leading us, and definitely strong and able people who came tonight to share their insights. And before I go, I'm going to share screen because there are two totally different activities of the League that are coming up. Well, they're not both from the League, but the League is involved in both of them. The first one is second, and this is just what I typed up tonight after a meeting that I went to relative to June 10th. But the first event will be May 24th, and that's the candidate forum for all candidates for Erie County Sheriff of both the Republican and Democratic Party. Voice Buffalo is the host, the League and others are partners. In fact, I think probably most of the groups that are listed on my sheet here. And you can go to our League website LWVBN.org to register for that event. And you also will have an opportunity to pose questions for the candidates for sheriff. And the second event is a candidate forum for mayor of Buffalo. And it's only the Democratic Party that will be having they'll be involved in the primary, because these are both for the primary candidates. And that's going to be June 10th. It will be totally by Zoom and from 6:30 to 8 p.m. And so I'm letting you folks know about that. We will be sending out flyers and information through our Facebook page, through our webpage, and to our members. But this is for everyone in the community. We urge people to attend one or both of them and to pose questions that relate to the sheriff and the mayor. Of course, the mayor is specifically for citizens of Buffalo. And so with that, I think that I'm finished for tonight. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Terry. I want to say a special thank you to Marian Deutschman, our moderator, and to all the panelists. And it was a very engaging, informative discussion. I am committed to moving this discussion forward and having more forums and expanding the reach of this discussion outside of the League of Women Voters into other areas. So I will commit to doing that as the chair of the Education Committee. And I would invite all of you to join me back for when that does happen. I see Ramona. Ramona, did you want to say a last thing? I kind of thought you raised your hand there. Or no? No?
Put a thumbs
No,
up.
I was just giving a thumbs up for everybody. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So again, thank you very much, all of you, our participants, the league, Marian, our panelists. This is fabulous. I'm hoping to continue this forward. And with that, we will close off at 8:20, and you all have a very good evening, and we will be in touch. So thank you again.
Hey, Susan.
Yes.
Lenore was referencing something that y'all watched, a video that y'all watched that was on last night. What was that was on last night?
It's if you go to YouTube and the PBS NewsHour channel, it's on their YouTube channel, and it's the students produced the news program and interviewed other students along with the PBS crew.
And that's what it's from yesterday?
Yes, it's from the 18th, and you'll see it. You'll see it's probably 3 or 4 down in that list, but you'll see what I'm talking about from the 18th. It's really, really good.
Was it Disruption? Was that?
Yes,
Disruption.
Yep. There is another one that really focused on single mothers with children and no support, and that's a podcast from The Daily. And boy, if you listen to that one about the single mothers, heartbreaking, just so totally heartbreaking. So The Daily podcast, which is a New York Times product, and I'll see if I can find that link, and I'll send them both those links out to everybody, so if they want to watch those 2 programs or listen to that program, you'll be able to.
Thank you so much. Everybody have a great night. Appreciate the invitation.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you to all you participants. I really appreciate your input and insights.
Good night.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.